Welcome back to It's Hard Out Here, a podcast that allows you a sneak peek into the lives of two mildly unhinged individuals navigating the complexities of the modern era. Today we have a new mildly unhinged individual co-hosting with me, the enigmatic, the mysterious, and slightly off-kilter Lee.
Happy to be here.
So I'm going to need you guys to give Lee a bit of a warm welcome because it's their first time on the podcast and we're hoping to go forward as co-hosts.
Honestly, this is a very vulnerable moment for me right now. I'm so nervous. I'm sweating through my feet.
Ew. Keep your feet away from me, Bessie. So today we'll be talking about femcels, which we're very excited for. I feel about like a bit of a femcel. You were saying that it's severely impacted your mental health.
It's somewhat. I think that a lot of the research has definitely affected me a lot more than I expected to.
Yeah.
I think, so, Hayley, I think it's a good place to start. Why did we want to talk about this? And why did we want to approach the subject?
Well, I remember you brought it up and I was like, damn, like it made me question, am I a femcel? And so I feel like I had to hyperfixate on it to really like determine whether I'm a femcel. And we'll give you, we'll give you the final, judgment on that.
Just calling yourself out right now.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's why. What about you? What?
I think something that made me really curious about this movement, I think I slowly started to find out more about it because I love the band Boa. Mm-hmm. And I love Serial Experiments Lane. And
two very like femcel, like peak femcel culture,
which we will discuss later on. And I would find a lot of edits on Instagram, and I found femcel.
Let's not get those two confused.
well, that's also something we'll bring up later on.
Yeah.
And I found the femcel hashtag, and something that I thought was really interesting was this strange and weird subculture that I had never even considered before, because we had always heard of the term femcel.
I also feel like, sorry to interrupt you, but I feel like we had a conversation about feminism and what the new wave of feminism looks like. And I feel like femcel is kind of like this weird offshoot of feminism. It's kind of like very, I don't know, tainted almost. I don't know. It's just,
I think, and this is something that we will definitely
break down later.
Isn't this kind of funny because we're also foreshadowing so many points of discussion?
Yeah.
But I think what made me really interested in femcels is that oftentimes, and I think this is a thing with a lot of internet communities, whether it's furries or whether it's other unhinged or strange or interesting sub-communities online, is that we can often characterize and depict them in a way that can be a little bit unkind. And I think a lot of femcels are quite aware of this and probably wear it on their... They wear it on their sleeve.
Yeah.
But I think what's really interesting in so many of these tropes and these motifs, in so much of this consistency of there's so many themes and there's so many ideas and concepts and a lot of media that is very consistent with a lot of femcel culture. And I think approaching that with, an open mind and with a sense of, and hopefully with a sense of empathy, we can kind of learn a lot about what makes this community and this trend tick, what makes this subculture what it is, and ask ourselves if we are uncomfortable with this subculture and what it implies.
What makes you uncomfortable.
What it implies and what are the internal problems. Hopefully, if we do have problems with it, we can come up with it. We can come
up
and
with
make
a solution.
Maybe not make a solution, but we can have a much more holistic critique of that movement.
And so with that said, we will be breaking down, femcels. Who are they? What do they like? And are they productive? So to do this, I think we need to start off with what is a femcel. So we kind of broke this down into kind of two separate waves. So the first wave was it was a feminine incel, so an involuntary celibate but the feminine version. So the definition we have here is a femcel is a woman that is involuntarily celibate, named after the male version of the group incels. Typically, femcels place the onus on themselves as to why they are not achieving sex in the sex lives they desire. While more often than not, incels place the onus on the women that are rejecting them.
It's worth noting that the incel movement, when it was Alana's involuntary celibate project, was not really gender discriminate or gender distinct. It was for both men and women.
Yeah.
And it is only because of the modern incel that we know of now, and especially a lot of the violent crimes that are perpetrated by individuals such as Elliot Rodger and many other nameless faces in the crowd who've committed atrocities.
Well, there's even a few around Sydney at the moment.
I imagine so.
Yeah.
And so at one point it wasn't distinct, but of course in this kind of first wave that we described, that was kind of the distinction, this kind of the girl who couldn't get attention or couldn't get the love that they wanted or wanted to receive. But it was always still distinct from incels because I'd still argue that it was much more holistic. And as you said, a lot of the onus was on themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's a big factor, like a big point of differentiation for them. But I feel like it started off very close to incels, but then kind of like around 2021, 2022, which interestingly enough was post-COVID. So I wonder if that played a role in people being chronically online, something like that. The narrative then kind of shift towards females becoming voluntarily celibate. So, I mean, it was through COVID. So I feel like it would have been easy to be voluntarily celibate because we couldn't see anyone. We were locked in our houses. You really had to want to go and see someone for sex if you wanted to go out, leave the house, that kind of thing.
You pretty much had to sneak out and Metal Gear Solid style in a cardboard box.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like after that, maybe it was COVID that played a role in that. There was a shift towards them becoming voluntarily celibate as they felt or like they are or cannot be witnessed by males in a way that they feel valued for more than just their body. And I also think that it was during the COVID time that Andrew Tate became really popular as well.
And the manosphere was always there. It was always a problem.
Yeah.
And I think it was mainly because of the popularity of individuals such as Andrew Tate, such as Sneeko, a lot of individuals in that kind of I suppose new age masculinity. I wouldn't really know what the word is for it, but I think another alpha male movement, and sigma, and interestingly enough, the sigma male trend and movement, which also had a strange influence on femcel culture as well.
Yeah.
Something that I think, as you said, what changed, especially during that time, I think especially was COVID, because that was a time when people were inside a lot more. People were consuming a lot more content on the internet. We were already addicted to the internet.
But then we just had so much more time because a lot of us couldn't go to our jobs.
Yes. And I think that was when, especially as a lot more people who may not have been that kind of first kind of femcel, with more experience of that loneliness and more experience of that kind of person. You could be someone who is drop dead gorgeous, but with that kind of experience of what it's like to be alone, and also a lot of that space,
I feel like
there's also a kind of self-discovery.
Yeah, I feel like it would have allowed a lot of people to be like, oh, you know what? It's actually kind of nice being alone. Like, I know I've been like that. It's like, oh, it's actually kind of nice being alone. I feel like I could voluntarily do this.
And this is where we start to see a lot of the change from femcels being this people who can't get a boyfriend, can't get a husband, can't get someone that can truly love them for who they are.
Yeah.
And where that first wave is kind of distinct in the sense of being many people who may feel that they're not attractive, that they can't meet standards. A lot of people in the modern femcel movement What started to change is that a lot of people may or may not be attractive. Attractiveness may or may not be a factor. And ease of which getting a relationship or a boyfriend may or may not be a factor. But the biggest thing is this sense of perspective in that a lot of the men in their life and a feeling that the culture and masculine culture doesn't allow for the kind of man that would be able to perceive or respect or holistically love them for anything more than sex or emotional entitlement or the like.
Yeah. And so we've got a quote here from Global News in 2023, which states, "No two femcels are exactly alike. Often there's considerable infighting about who can call themselves a true quote-unquote femcel. Some believe that a conventionally attractive woman cannot possibly be a femcel, like you were just discussing, regardless if she is celibate or not. Others are more inclusive and will argue anyone who identifies with the label can claim it." So did you kind of want to talk about a little bit more about the history and the evolution of the femcel? I mean, I know we just kind of went through that, but did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
I think we've kind of covered our bases here, and you have an anecdote here that I think is quite interesting, because as this anecdote kind of goes into, one of the big differences between, I guess, this kind of first wave femcel that pretty much starts at any time that incel became the known to the public lexicon, and this kind of ephemeral point in 2020 when it started, or 2021 when it started to shift. The biggest thing is a sense of irony. The biggest thing is this sense of voluntary squalor and voluntary, I wouldn't say voluntary loneliness, but this kind of indignified embrace of mess and filth and flaw that has a sense of irony to it, and I think this anecdote that you brought here really establishes that well, if you'd like to read it.
Yep, so the Standard 2022 stated, "It started as a joke," said 19-year-old Georgina, who regularly posts on the femcel hashtag on TikTok. "But now I think people are saying they're femcel because heterosexuality, as we experience it within this patriarchal system, is broken." Georgina says she has never had sex and has no plans to start having it. Part of what drove her towards femceldom is that age 15 she was sexually assaulted by a much older man. "I feel like saying no to sex is an empowered choice. I refuse to participate in this system, and who could blame me?" I feel like this kind of shows like that girl boss like vibe. It's like empowering to her.
One of the big, I think it's also somewhat of a rejection of something that became very popular throughout the 2010s and early 2020s, and has now started to see a little bit more of a pushback, is this concept of sexual liberation. Because I think while femcels may not be opposed to people having sex on their own terms, I think there's a greater awareness, not just amongst femcels or feminists, but I think across all women, that much of sexual liberation has been co-opted, exploited, and utilized by men for men, for purposes that it was never meant to be. A lot of the more holistic purpose of sexual liberation is, I want to be sexually active on my own terms, but that also has created something of a standard that many women may not really want to be. Some women don't really want to be sexually active, or portray themselves in a way that's burlesque or as we like to say, serving cunt.
Yeah.
And I think that and another thing we come into, we'll talk about a lot of the themes and motifs, but we also start to see one of the big motifs is a rejection of men and a rejection of heterosexuality.
I feel like it's a lot of women going, "Oh, men want this, 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 and this. Their standards are so high, but I can't even get the bare minimum, so I'm going to withhold what they want so much."
You could argue that. I think for a lot of people, it's that they just don't want to engage. Why bother? Why bother try to? And I think what we have to remember is that being a femcel in this context, in what we're talking about today, is a very voluntary decision. It's a very conscientious decision, and it's one that comes with a lot of pain. In this particular case, pain of loneliness, pain of that fundamental want to be seen and held and wanted, but at the same time, the risk of being with another man who may abuse you, may assault you, may manipulate you, even if he doesn't, may not understand you, may weaponize his incompetence.
Yeah, and it's like, what's the reward for such high risk?
Yes, is it really worth satiating that loneliness if all you're going to get is disappointment?
Or trauma.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and I think hetero-fatalism is a really important point in both incels and femcels. So we've got written down here, like we've kind of drawn out the idea that incels believe the opposite sex will never want them, and femcels believe they will never be holistically understood and are doomed only to be exploited. So do you kind of want to explain what hetero-fatalism is and how it kind of relates to both of those groups?
Hetero-fatalism is the concept, or more so the feeling, and perhaps even ideology, of a negative... It perceives a negative conclusion with being heterosexual.
Yeah.
It usually is this feeling of fundamental disappointment with realizing that you are only attracted to the opposite sex.
Yeah.
And it's also the conclusion that the opposite sex will never give you what you want.
Like, I get it. We all want to be a part of the alphabet mafia, but some people just can't.
Yeah, that's the thing. And you can sort of see this in something of the history of political lesbianism, which the modern femcel movement is very much a echo of, if in my opinion.
Yeah, you can definitely feel the reverberations.
It's somewhat of a reverberation, but the thing about a lot of political lesbians were oftentimes,
It's like, were you a golden lesbian, which meant you had never slept with a man? And they were perceived as like real lesbians.
Well, I don't think many of them were. I think a lot of them, and you.
But
could
that was
also,
like the gold standard. You know what I mean?
And I think a lot of political lesbians, it was not so much out of a genuine love and affection for women in a romantic or even sexual sense, but more so
a hatred for the patriarchy.
Yeah, hatred for men, a hatred for patriarchy.
Yeah,
and a rejection of it. And I think, and there's definitely a little bit of a sticky can of worms here. One could, on the one hand, and many people of many different origins and many opinions will definitely differ on it. Some might say that political lesbianism is this great, is a great form of empowerment. Others may say that it's kind of an exploitation, or at the very least a misappropriation of lesbian identity. I'd imagine that many lesbians would be all for it, and many lesbians would equally find it to be quite obnoxious.
Yeah.
And I think something that's very interesting, other differences between a lot of incels and the modern version of femcels, is that something that is quite interesting is that although they are nowhere near as related as I would argue the first wave was, there is a kind of overlap in that both groups, both trends and both perspectives believe that the other has power.
Yeah. And
believes that the other has power over them. It's kind of this mutual I'd call it master
balance.
Well, I'd say that it's this mutual master-slave dialectic.
Yeah.
And so you both have two groups that really do feel that the other has power over the other.
And then there kind of breeds a lot of resentment. Yeah.
There's a great level of gender resentment.
Yeah.
And I think that that's very interesting to consider. It's not necessarily a one-to-one who's better, who's worse, but definitely I think a similarity of this sense of indignation by the other sex.
And I think when we were looking at a lot of femcel media, a lot of the femcel narrative, we did identify a lot of like common aesthetics, common themes. Female rage was a big one, and I think that just comes from feeling like, that they like men have power over women, and they're just refusing to participate in like what they believe is the patriarchy, and they refuse to give the power to a man like that they believe. So female rage is a big one. Like they obviously hold a lot of like resentment. There are themes of loneliness as well.
And hikikomori.
So what is that?
Hikikomori, it stems from Japan, or at least the term does. It's the concept of somebody who is a complete shut-in, who at this point is so depressed and so overwhelmed or so overworked that they close off everything, stay in their room, and do not come out. They don't interact. Obviously, it's a term to be taken with a grain of salt, and we have to be considerate over how to apply that term. But I think that it's a trend that I think has a lot more global usage, because I think a lot of us are much more shut inside at the moment. Even after COVID-19, after a lot of the lockdowns have been lifted, a lot of people still couldn't really leave their rooms. The idea of going back into the outside world was just overwhelming.
Do you think that was like, it was kind of like borderline agoraphobic?
To an extent, agoraphobia is a very
extreme.
Agoraphobia is a very real phobia,
Yeah.
and comes from a very physical,
like deep rooted. Yeah, it's a visceral experience.
It's a very visceral experience, and hikikomori is much more of a
subdued.
Again, if hikikomori agoraphobia defines a disorder. Hikikomori defines an action, and the two may be interrelated. But hikikomori is something that is really interesting, because a lot of these trends we also found not only in a lot of posts, a lot of these motifs we found not only in posts and images and discussions, but also in I think a lot of the identifying features that a lot of femcels kind of tend to engage with and proliferate, and perhaps even unintentionally encourage. So, of course, we have female rage.
Yeah.
And with a lot of the visual, if you go onto Femcel Pinterest or Femcel Instagram,
a lot of grey muted tones. Like
there's a lot of grey muted tones.
Yeah.
And loneliness and hikikomori, there's a constant visual motif of mess, visual motif of the room in complete chaos. Sometimes there's nothing at all in the room, and it's just this
feeling,
this empty space, and sometimes it's completely hoarded with stuff to the point you can't see the ground. Something that adds to this is often it is accompanied by an image of an anime character, which we'll get to later, but anime is something that also is often engaged with by a lot of femcels.
There's a lot of pictures of like wallowing tears and sadness as well, which kind of like with the colors of like grey and muted tones, it very much depicts like the normalization of girl failure. So instead of empowering characters like Wonder Woman and Susan, what's his name? Susan the
YouTube CEO.
It's like girl failure, like just absolute train wrecks of female characters.
There's a sense of, because the truth is that female empowerment is really only relevant to you if you are somebody who has ambition, and not all men and women are actually that ambitious.
Yeah.
Some people just like
everyday goals, like getting through the day.
Well, some people just want to have their base needs met. Some people just want to make sure there's enough to eat, enough to pay for rent, enough to have.
I also feel like just dissatisfaction in general and femininity as a curse is such a huge theme. It just reminds me of the song Bloody Motherfucking Asshole by Martha Wainwright. Like, it's just like there's this line in the song where she's like, oh, I wish I was born a man so I could learn to stand up for myself.
Yep.
And I'm like, that's femcel. That's peak femcel.
I think another motif that I really find quite funny, that I think has a lot of origins in. I don't know if it has many, I think Tumblr was where a lot of this came from, but is the feral. Is the feral art.
Yeah.
So the if you've ever seen like art where like somebody is like clutching, where like some human figure is like clutching their thighs and like it's bleeding, or where they're literally like cannibalizing on another person and it's like, and the impact font text would say something like how I feel when affection. and
it's just like this gnarled like raccoon kind of looking person.
Because it's also something that I think is really interesting is this great contrast. On the one hand, we have a lot of muted tones and muted colors, being inside, being inactive, and also being and also this sense of darkness and I would probably call it lethargy, but at the same time, there's also
like this rabid
and
like
extreme
energy.
There's these extreme emotions of rage, resentment, hatred, lust, want.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is I think part of this culture, the subculture, and these trends and these images are somewhat of a communication of a mass depression.
Which is why I feel like it's kind of surprising that My Year of Rest and Relaxation is such a peak text for femcels. Like, it's got that really cozy, like wallowing sadness, like cozy depression vibes. And I know that sounds like an oxymoron. How can depression be cozy? But like, there's like that depression where you feel like you're just floating through everyday life, and then there's the depression where you have that rage and like you just want to like. You're like, I just have so much rage, I'm going to explode with how much just negative energy I have.
Which leads us into the next topic, and that is of femcel media, which I think is really important, because when you look at femcel media, you can start to see where a lot of these motifs, where a lot of these emotions, and where a lot of these ideas start to spurn from. You've mentioned My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which I would say is probably the quintessential femcel book.
Yeah.
That is about a woman who wants to do nothing but rot inside her
go rot, bed rot.
Yeah, who wants to do nothing except
but I feel like we don't get that rage, you know what I mean? Like that female rage. Like, she just like is so apathetic.
But that's where we get a lot of the other media that kind of suits that.
Yeah, so like we have Jennifer's Body, which is like the complete opposite. So that's that real rage and like that. But there's not much of that rotting. You know what I mean?
Well, I think this piece of media, I think every piece of femcel media serves a purpose. In the case of something like Year of Rest and Relaxation, it communicates, I think, a feeling that a lot of people understand, and that is that feeling of wanting to disconnect, wanting to dissociate, only wanting to focus on what does the main character do? She wakes up, goes to the bodega, gets her coffee, goes back and sleeps.
Yeah.
And there is definitely strong emotions. She's dealing with a lot of grief. There's, I think, a very deep level of insecurity, especially with her best friend, that comes out as, I think, that is expressed as a kind of insecure
there's definitely themes of insecurity, for sure.
And also another thing, again, we also have Jennifer's Body, as you mentioned.
Yes.
Why do you think that became a bit of a femcel
because
icon?
It's literally, it's talking about how Jennifer will literally eat men's souls. But I find it interesting because at the end she's like, I go both ways. And she like eats women as well. So I get like how the first half is femcel, but I don't understand how the second half is femcel. Maybe because like the other girl, Needy, she is very like apathetic and just like, like it's like girl rotting vibes, I guess, that bed rot.
Well, something that I think is really quite interesting is because there's a lot of elements of femcel motifs and features. We do have a lot of we do have that female rage, and we do have that kind of revenge fantasy. Something that I do find quite interesting is that Jennifer doesn't go after douchebags. She's not going after men who clearly... She doesn't even go after the men who sacrifice her. She goes after people who initially seem quite inoffensive and not as entitled.
I feel like just because you're not conventionally offensive doesn't mean you're not offensive still.
But do you think that the characters engaged in that?
I don't remember the male character. Like they do not stand out to me. It's been years since I watched the movie.
I think what I quite think is also interesting is that Needy, the kind of quote-unquote loser character compared to Jennifer, is actually, in many ways, she's kind of a bit of an anti-femcel, because, yes, while she's, very dorky, very nerdy, and clearly has an unbalanced relationship with Jennifer, she also has a boyfriend who is a little bit of an idiot, but also seems to have his heart in the right place.
Yeah.
She seems to, stick to her hobbies and her principles. And maybe probably a bit of... And Jennifer, to me, doesn't really feel like... To me, I'm quite surprised that she might be interpreted as a femcel hero, because Jennifer's body, in many ways, I think, depicts that kind of difference between... that Madonna whore pressure of having to be the sexy girl, having to be the object of desire. I think maybe it probably isn't even Jennifer that a lot of femcels relate to. Maybe it's Needy at the very end when she becomes a succubus, but only on her own terms. She's not trying to be as sexy.
Yeah, that's a good point.
She's not trying to be as sexy as Jennifer, and she's not trying to be... and she's also kind of unbound after the death of her boyfriend to kind of chase her own destiny. And maybe that's probably the reason.
I think also we have to talk about, if we're talking about femcel media, we have to talk about the quintessential femcel film book, and that is Gone Girl. So if you didn't know, Gone Girl, the 2012 psychological thriller by Gillian Flynn, follows Nick and Amy Dunn, a beautiful couple whose relationship publicly crumbles when Amy disappears on their 5th anniversary. It's a story with no hero that explores the complexities of the stories we tell ourselves, insidious toxic masculinity, the power of revenge, and the deceptive facades people keep up to attract each other. Gone Girl made the New York Times bestseller list in 2012 and was adapted into an Academy Award-nominated film starring Rosamund Pike and Ben Affleck. Now, I'm so excited to listen to the monologue. Let's go.
Nick and Amy will be gone, but then we never really existed. Nick loved a girl I was pretending to be. Cool girl. Men always use that, don't they, as their defining compliment. She's a cool girl. Cool girl is hot. Cool girl is gay. Cool girl is fun. Cool girl never gets angry at her man. She only smiles in a chagrin-loving manner and then presents her mouth for fucking. She likes what he likes, so evidently, he's a vinyl hipster who loves fetish manga. If he likes girls gone wild, she's a mall babe who talks football and endures buffalo wings at Hooters. When I met Nick Dunn, I knew he wanted cool girl. And for him, I'll admit, I was willing to try. I wax stripped my pussy raw. I drank canned beer watching Adam Sandler movies. I ate cold pizza and remained a size 2. I blew it, semi-regularly. I lived in the moment. I was fucking game. I can't say I didn't enjoy some of it. Nick teased out in me things I didn't know existed. A lightness, a humor, an ease. But I made him smarter, sharper. I inspired him to rise to my level. I forged the man of my dreams. We were happy pretending to be other people. We were the happiest couple we knew. And what's the point of being together if you're not the happiest? But Nick got lazy. He became someone I did not agree to marry. He actually expected me to love him unconditionally. Then he dragged me, penniless, to the navel of this great country and found himself a newer, younger, bouncier, cool girl. You think I'd let him destroy me and end up happier than ever? No fucking way. He doesn't get to win. My cute, charming, salt-of-the-earth Missouri guy. He needed to learn. Grown-ups work for things. Grown-ups pay. Grown-ups suffer consequences.
So I feel like it's got that, like, there's obviously revenge. Like, it's extreme female rage, but it also has themes of look at what women do for men and what do we get in return. And I think that is peak femcel.
I think something that's also really interesting, especially about the movie scene itself, is that we do see her kind of shed a lot of that. As she's shedding that cool girl image, she's kind of embellishing and embracing a lot of that kind of mess, that degeneration, that rot. I don't want to say rot, but a lot of that quote-unquote unwomanly behavior. She's no longer wearing the pretty dresses. She's she's buying, like, the junk food at the store.
Yeah, but, like, it shows, not only does she tell us, but she shows how she's obviously done a lot of things that isn't her, quote-unquote, to try and please a man.
Something that I think is also really interesting about this scene and this movie is that it also comes to the first crux of something that I notice with a lot of femcel media and a lot of femcel interpretation, and that is that oftentimes, especially with a lot of movies that we're going to discuss, with obviously we've mentioned Jennifer's Body, and I think it's also the case with Gone Girl, and that is that the interpretation of these characters and the embrace of these characters often goes into a different direction than author intent, sometimes voluntarily so. I think a really good example would probably be, for a counterexample, Fight Club is famously a critique of male mindset, masculinity, modern...
I feel like American Psycho is also like that.
Absolutely, especially. And that's something we're also going to mention, because weirdly, that's another femcel movie.
Yeah.
Femcel favorite movie. But Gone Girl, something that is really important in that monologue, while she does talk about the ways in which she was trying to meet these impossible expectations for Nick, at the same time, she also fully admits to kind of being manipulative herself.
Yeah.
One of the reasons in the book and the movie that Nick feels this sense of, I'd say, like, disconnect, whether he knows the full reason or not, is that there's a part of him that detects that his wife is not who she says she is, and not who she thinks he is. That she literally says in one of the things, "I made him into my man. I made him better." And that also, we also see with a lot of femcel motifs and themes, we see a bit of an overlap with a lot of female manipulator culture or dark feminine culture, which utilizes a lot of pickup artist techniques and a lot of psychological techniques in order to, quote-unquote, get or make a high-value male, have somebody who is always chasing after you, have someone obsessed with you, have someone do the things, have someone exercise so he can have a good body. Very manipulative techniques that she clearly is using here. And again, we have to remember that this isn't really... I don't want to say this as a direct criticism of femcel in the way of saying, like, oh, look at how they're misinterpreting this movie. But I think you can interpret something outside of the author's intent. I think it goes to show the kind of the patterns.
Something I've noticed within all of the movies that I have seen, so Pearl, Girl Interrupted, Skins, so Effie from Skins, My Year of Rest and Relaxation, all of the main characters are quite jaded. And yeah, I mean, I think Serial Experiments Lane, I haven't seen that, but that is also a very quintessential femcel text. Did you want to have a bit of a chat about that?
So I'm not going to spoil too much because I think Serial Experiments Lane is a brilliant show. And I think that if you are someone who is really artsy-fartsy but hates anime, and why wouldn't you, let's be real, Serial Experiments Lane is the one that I would recommend. And the Serial Experiments Lane is quite an interesting choice for an inspiration for a lot of femcel media, because I wouldn't say that it's directly has all of the themes, but it has a lot of the visual motifs, and Lane herself kind of is a little bit of a quintessential femcel character. We see her not trying to be this sexy cool girl or cool high school girl. We see her as someone who is very much a face in the crowd.
Yeah.
And when she's at home, she often lazes about in her singlets and shorts, or she'll wear her really comfy bear onesie. And a lot of the themes of the show also discuss, ahead of its time, mind you, a lot of the themes and implications of the internet.
When was
online.
it made?
It was made, I believe, very early 2000s or
Yeah,
late 90s.
right.
I believe must have been 2000, 2001. But it had a lot of early implications for what the internet would become, how people would be influenced and changed by the internet. And femcel was very much defined, especially when we consider those motifs of hikikomori and loneliness. We see a lot of those elements in Serial Experiments Lane.
So moving on from that, we do have a playlist that we've put together. We'll try and link that in the description somewhere.
Of like femcel songs.
Yeah. It's kind of a bop. Like it kind of slaps. So we're going to move on to some funny, interesting facts. We can break down some memes. First off, let's talk about the femcel tagline. Fucking hell. Gaslight, girl boss, gatekeep. So that is a tongue-in-cheek critique of a culture in which women exploit others in order to achieve success or status. A girl boss is a self-made or successful woman, and the phrase was coined by Sophia Amoruso in her book #GirlBoss. So gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss is a parody of the phrase live, laugh, love, used in a variety of shit posts that began in Tumblr in January 2021.
And it's also very, very prescient because, again, we see a lot of media depicting... That's why we see a lot of media depicting girl failures. We have characters like Fleabag. We have characters like Lane. We have characters that are...
I would argue
or the main character
that Amy Dunn is kind of a girl failure.
Certainly...
Like, she's both a victor and a loser.
Well, I think Amy Dunn...
Like, she achieves what she wants to do, but I don't...
But she's perpetually unhappy. She's always unhappy with the kind of illusion that she has to face. She's clearly...
it's a lot of effort.
And the thing is, like, she's very manipulative, but she also kind of... Her plan also kind of fucks up in front of her. And that's...
On multiple occasions.
On multiple occasions. She's not the kind of... It also... Something that's really good about Gone Girl is that Gone Girl kind of also critiques... kind of contradicts this idea of like the scheming, ever cunning woman, because Amy Dunn, sometimes her plans, because she's human, fuck up.
She's actually not a robot.
Yeah.
And then another thing was the whole man versus bear thing. Did you hear about this?
I did.
Yeah.
So
there was this whole viral argument on TikTok, Twitter, social media. Would you rather be stuck in a forest with a man or a bear? I know for me, I'd probably rather be in the forest with a bear because, let's be real, bears are in a forest. If you're stuck in the forest with a man, you're probably going to encounter a bear, and then you're stuck with both of them. And also, I think I would feel more comfortable with a bear.
I think for me, it's.
I'm not worried about a bear sexually assaulting me.
That's fair enough. I didn't think about. That's a strange image to
It would probably just maul me to death, and a man can do that anyway.
That's fair enough. It's that is a really interesting thing, and something that I found really quite interesting was the negative reaction from a lot of the online men chipping into the discussion. Kind of another this accusation.
Like
of
there
it
was a
being
lot of
another-
gaslighting from men, and I'm like, okay, girl boss.
I think like there's this sense of like, oh, you need men. What are men going to protect?
Who's going to make your fire?
It's just like you need men to protect you. It's just like, and the good question is from who?
Yeah, from men.
And I think and that's another interesting thing, because the thing is, if you're in a forest and there's a bear, I can't claim to be a bear expert, but generally there is a way to
Outsmart them?
Well, there's a way to diminish your chances of being attacked.
Right.
Like you have to, if you play dead, if you announce your presence, if you
look it directly in the eye.
I don't know if that works, but maybe it does.
Don't look it directly in the eye.
I can't. Well, certainly if you announce your presence without imposing, or if it looks aggressive, you have to play dead because it's probably not going to eat you.
I just had a visual of it not being aggressive, but then it turning aggressive, and you just death drop,
But I think that's something that is. But there's sort of ways to get around it. Whereas if there's a lone man in the woods.
What the fuck is he doing there?
Exactly. There's a lot of, and especially what we know about so many mysterious cases that goes on, and how many murders are conducted in non-urban areas.
Sorry, I skipped forward to the memes.
Save
Me
that
and
for
the girls.
the moment. But that kind of, and so when you really think about it, obviously it's very understandable why you would kind of prefer to go with the bear, but at the same time, that I don't really know if that was always the discussion, what it was really about, because it wasn't necessarily about just the kind of strangeness of what a man would even be doing. It's the fact that even if it wasn't some stranger in the woods.
Well,
some
even if
crazy
you
guy
invited
in the
him
woods,
in, there are definitely dangers associated with that.
It's kind of, the fear is not necessarily of some distinct serial killer man out to get you, but more so, what is a man going to do when he doesn't have the eyes of the public and society?
Maybe this makes me a femcel, but I feel like if I was stuck in the forest with a woman, women have been it has been drilled into us from a young age that we need to stick together. If we go to the bathroom, we don't go alone. So I feel like if I was stuck in the forest with a woman, I could trust them to not skin me alive for their own, for them to try and survive, unless it were absolutely necessary. Whereas a man, I'm that hasn't been drilled into them. They don't go to the bathroom together. You know what I mean?
Do you, it's sort of, and it ties back into that thing, it's not just thinking about, some man who is already violent, already a tendency towards it. It is, do you trust the common man that is outside of the eyes of society?
And I think this leads to the not all men argument, but if you piss in an apple juice, I'm not going to drink any of those apple juices because I don't know which one is the piss. You know what I mean?
I think if we ever do a future episode on incels or on male loneliness, I think something that I think is something worth considering is that I think a big thing about incels and about a lot of I think a big reason why there's kind of been this return to a lot of this hyper manosphere.
As in Andrew Tate?
Yeah, that kind of Andrew Tate kind of thing is that this kind of... I remember saying to a friend of mine, and I said, look, you are going to be compared. It doesn't matter whether you are a good man, an average man, a bad man. And I said, you are going to be compared not only with her ex or her friends, etc. You are going to be compared to every man that has ever hurt her.
Yeah.
Whether it's been friendship or relationship or etc. Or every man that has ever felt threatening. you as a potential partner are just going to be compared.
Yeah.
And obviously, as we're talking about femcels from a feminine perspective, that's a very reasonable take. But for a dude, and again, this isn't a kind of
I
defense.
feel like it's
definitely a very emotionally dense.
It's
context.
really interesting to have a man's perspective on femcels. Like, Lee, the expert on femcels, a man.
You had a note about how this applies to the queer community.
Yeah,
What are your
well,
thoughts
before
about
we
that?
get to that, I do want to talk about, do we think I'm a femcel? I think, yes, I'm a hater at heart. I am a hater. And I love a good rut. And I'm fine not having any male attention. I'm fine, like, not engaging with men. Does that make me a femcel? Yeah. Do I hate all men? I'm going to plead the fifth on that one because I don't know.
I'm on thin ice right now.
Yeah, but like, it's like the bi flag. I'm bi, but like, the men's section is like this, you know what I mean? Like, men are on thin ice. I'm very skeptical of them all. I don't hate them all, but like, I'm very skeptical of them. And I don't know if that makes me a femcel.
Do you think that, and do you identify, with all of the movies that we've talked about, do you identify with most of them?
Some of them, like, they're really good movies. I enjoy them. I find them entertaining. I do relate to some of them, but I don't know.
Well, and it'll be very interesting to see if you, we'll have a look at the queer context of femcel.
Like, it's
I also
interesting.
but I also will be very interested then in what might be your critique of it.
Okay, what's the question here?
We have an interesting cure question that somebody asked.
Is there a comparable incel movement in the LGBT community? Short answer, not that I've seen. Okay, well, that answers it.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. God, I hope not. It's stupid enough in the straight community. Look, the gays have said no. I don't even know what that would look like. Like, who would they hate? What does that dynamic look like? I don't know. Like,
So something that I thought you had like a whole essay planned here.
no, it's just a genuine question. I'm like, what does that look like?
Can I put my 2 cents?
Yeah, please. Because I have no sense. I don't know. I'm broke.
I don't think there's as much of a how should I say, incel or femcel movement in the LGBT community. But I do think that there are a lot of elements that can be quite similar to other kind of reactionary movements. You'll see a lot of, how should I say, you'll see a lot of internalized homophobia or especially amongst queers who are outcast who... Can I put a bit of personal experience?
Oh, for sure. I feel like you can definitely have that resentment, but like, I feel like it's not as specifically targeted. It's kind of just like, I hate people. And I think that's where I am. You know what I mean? Like, I often hate a lot of women as well as men. And I know that's a fatal flaw of mine.
Cancelled.
It's a fatal flaw of mine. I'll cop that one. Like, that, I'm a hater at heart when I tell you, but I think that's what makes me not a femcel.
If I can interject,
please.
I think so. Without revealing too much, like I'm by myself, and me and my close friends, we were
Haley and Biley. Sorry, that one. I was just formulating that in my head.
So me and my friends, we were, we were part of the queer community, whether people liked it or not.
What do you mean
we liked it or not? Well, I'm talking about years past. So years,
not in present.
Fuck off. Yes, I am in present.
Okay, just checking. I don't know. I was a bit confused.
But when me and my friends try to engage with kind of a lot of queer groups and a lot of youth groups that were
can be
very
really
queer,
gatekeepy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because a lot of us, especially me and a particular friend of mine, we were quite masculine presenting.
Yeah, I feel like gay men especially can be very cliquey.
Well, it wasn't just gay men. What I found was across a lot of queer culture, especially at the time, I don't know this, because this would probably be 7 or even 9 years now. So I don't know if anything has changed, but especially at the time, there was this sense of preference towards people who were much more feminine or gender ambiguous. So
Twinky,
a lot more twink and a lot more like trans women who were hyper feminine.
Yeah.
Lesbians who were hyper feminine.
Yeah, like lipstick lesbians.
Or kind of people who were very, very alternative and
Yeah.
my friends, we were clearly, look, we were into what we were into. It doesn't, you couldn't cut us from the queer community, whether we liked it or not. But we never really felt that we belonged because, obviously, especially in my case, like I'm bi, but that also means that I still love the ladies.
Yeah.
And so the kind of I think there probably was a little bit of skepticism or maybe that kind of that maybe that sense of like he can still have the straight man problems.
Yeah.
But even with some of my friends who were full gay,
fully gay, bro.
The maximum G. Because they were masculine presenting, there was a sense of disconnect, and we didn't watch Drag Race. We didn't listen to ABBA.
Oh damn!
We were metalheads.
I love ABBA.
And so there was this sense of disconnect, and I think and I shouldn't go on with this as much, but I think that you'll find probably a little bit of that.
And do you think that made you a gay cell?
Fuck off! No, I still
Yeah,
I could still
it's
smash.
different. Yeah.
but I think where that similar sense of resentment. Femcel very much, by its core, is defined by its resentment and its hetero-fatalism. And I think there are probably a lot of people who are very resentful of, if not their own part of the gay community, then then other distinct parts as well. We see that there's a lot of communities of lesbians who love trans women and a lot of lesbians who are very unkind towards them. There's a lot of butch lesbians that often don't feel themselves very seen, that are often kind of discounted by not just by male people, but also
circling back.
Yeah.
How do you think Femcel applies to the queer community? Like with your experience, how do you think it slots in?
This is my opinion.
That's my opinion. That would be my drag queen name. My opinion.
My opinion.
Maya opinion. Or Noah Vale.
Fuck it. This is my opinion. I think a lot of femcels like a lot of queer iconography. I think a lot of them like especially sapphic iconography. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of femcels could never... I think a lot of femcels really like a lot of the queer elements of... Especially amongst lesbians.
Uh-huh.
But I don't think many of them will ever truly embrace or explore, and sometimes may even be... I think sometimes their perspective is more so anti-men, but I think that has the potential to obscure the pro-woman potential that is lesbianism. So
moving on, down to our very last point, with all of this information that we've just plopped onto you, is the femcel community a productive movement? So obviously there are some problems with it, but I also feel like, it can be empowering because there's that validity to females who feel marginalized by men. And that is really important, having that recognition and that community. However, sometimes it can go a bit too far.
Did we want to read out one of the memes that I know we'll probably do a meme review at the very end? But
is this the one that you're thinking?
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you want me to read it out? Or
yeah,
yourself?
you go. This is all yours. I know this is the one that's really been affecting you. So I feel like.
So this one. We'll do a meme review at the end.
I feel like it would be really good for you to read it and then kind of tell us how you feel as a man. Like, how does it affect you?
Absolutely. So this is one of the ones that I found as I was looking through a lot of femcel memes and images. And it goes like this.
Why did I think you were going to start playing a song? Of course I'm a misandrist. It is all men. Sorry, please. The floor is yours.
No trouble, no trouble. Of course I'm a misandrist. It is all men, and they all disgust me. There is no such thing as a safe man. Thinking of one? Look through his following lists.
Oh, I'm triggered. I'm feeling triggered.
Ask him what porn he watches, and how often. Listen to the jokes he laughs at from his friends and online. Watch how he looks at the women around him. Women are not people, but items to be gawked at, longed for, and kept. It's always there somehow, no matter how nice they are, or how much they quote-unquote learn. Men are incapable of viewing women as anything but holes and mothers. How could I not hate them?
Before you put in how that makes you feel, can I just comment while it's fresh?
Of course.
Firstly, I'm triggered, and this is why I'm a hater at heart. Not only am I a hater because this stuff does have some validity to it, I'm a hater because she is thinking about that and she's putting that on social media, and it's really triggering, and there's no trigger warnings, there's nothing like that. Like, not only do I have resentment for the creator, but I have resentment for the content because some of it is, like, I feel like it's valid.
I think why there was a lot of, so as you mentioned at the start of the episode, a lot of this content did kind of take its toll on me after a while.
Yeah.
And I think because the one thing that I think is very defining of Femcel movement, even more so than a lot of feminists movements in the past, as well as the dark feminine movement that's also kind of coinciding with this, is the sheer amount of pain that is expressed. The loneliness the celibacy is voluntary, but the loneliness is there even if many of these women were to ever date, because the truth is, I don't feel that
this post kind of reminds me of that trend on Tumblr where everyone would post their self-harm, like their fresh self-harm. Like, it's the same thing, except it's emotional instead of physical.
I don't know if I would say that this is emotional self-harm, though there is a lot of that in the femcel communities.
I feel like this is, like, it's just so triggering. It is obviously, it's, like, really emotional.
Like, with every word that I read of this post is hurt. This is somebody who has
like, it's valid.
Like, absolutely. And it's clear that her experience, who she has known, whether she has been around it or dated or
you'd mentioned before, it obviously seems like every man has failed her in her life.
Yes.
Yeah.
It feels like every person in this woman's life has failed her. And it's very much a pause for thought, because it was this one thing that I never really put myself on, like, I never use a buzzword for myself, so I would never describe myself as anything really, because, and I especially feel, like, quite cynical whenever I hear a man say, like, they're a male feminist. I always...
Like, what does that even mean?
Like, I always, like, there's a part of me that kind of wonders, what's this guy playing at?
Like, is he pretending to be a feminist to get all the women?
But I feel like probably this woman has probably known some as well. And when I was reading this, it did, and with many of these posts, it kind of gave a little pause of concern of, like, or pause for thought, I should say, of, am I the good man that I can be? Are my friends the good people that I can be? Is there a way that we ourselves, and this is not just men, but especially men, like, is there a way that we kind of enable this sheer amount of hurt without realizing it? Because I think what really hits me about, like, a lot of the femcel content, I wouldn't just call it male guilt, like white guilt or anything like that. I wouldn't just call it that, but this kind of, this sense that, like, this pain, and whenever it's put out as raw and as honest and is resentful, regardless whether it's a good take or not. I'm not saying that any of the audience should agree with it or should think that it's completely
This is why
wrong.
I feel like Femcel goes too far. Like, the normalization of mental illness, great, fabulous. The romanticization of mental illness, not great.
Well, I think like this isn't so much the romanticization of mental illness as it is the romanticization of absolute
but it's
resentment.
trauma.
Absolutely, and
I guess trauma is associated with your mental health.
this is also something. So this is also, if we're going to, so we're probably transitioning into, I suppose, like what are our problems with the community?
Is it productive? Is it not? I think it can be. This is just my take. I think it can be. It can serve a purpose of validating and providing community to those who have obviously experienced trauma. However, it's like an echo chamber. When you're in a community like that and you're all talking about each other's trauma, you're all like hyping each other up, it becomes an echo chamber, and it becomes polarizing. You know what I mean? Like, you become even more of an extremist towards the belief that you're all kind of echoing.
So my thoughts. I'll say some things that I do like about the community, and I'm very certain that you feel the same.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, a lot of it, there's a lot of good taste in media. So,
the movies are great. Music's great.
Neon Genesis Evangelion is a favorite. A lot of people love Boa and
Joy Division,
Lana Del Rey.
Oh yes.
and also I think like the kind of embrace of flawed female characters and that kind of girl failures is something
great.
I think that is like a genuinely good.
Yeah, I want more imperfect female leads.
Yes, and because I think there is a bit of a rejection of that kind of I suppose like the Captain Marvel syndrome.
Yeah,
like girls who just get it done and
the girl bosses.
Yeah, girl boss culture, which I wouldn't say necessarily is insidious by base, but is definitely operates on this very often operates on this idea, very privileged idea that you can't be flawed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think flaws are a very fundamental part of, one of the reasons that I think we wanted to explore this community was very much because it is one that is very much engaged with flaws, and flaws are a fundamental human aspect.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the recognition for, I think, a lot of the women that are not noticed is definitely important. But there are definitely problems. So can you tell me what's going on here?
So we got a My Little Pony, me at 3 a.m. So there's obviously like signs of insomnia. We've got Lily Depp, who she is a bit on the thinner side. She was what some people would consider thinspo. And then we have a Diet Coke, which is symbolism for an eating disorder.
Correct. And there's a lot of... This is something that... And this also ties into, I think, probably one of my big points that's against a lot of the elements in the community, is that it is one thing for recognition of pain. It is one thing to communicate with others how you feel, where you're at, and create a support
I think that's
group.
great, yeah.
But what is, I think, one of the biggest problems, and I think something that...
pro-Anna vibes.
Well, one of the biggest problems with, I think, Femcel is that because pain and resentment and depression and loneliness are such, and degeneracy... I use the term degeneracy loosely, not to refer to like things that are degenerate in the sense of like, oh, this is too weird or too fucked up, but literally degenerating. One of the big problems is that we kind of have this romanticization of mental illness, and almost this encouragement and embellishment of not only mental illness itself, but of coping mechanisms that is going to make it worse. And of course, with
the maladaptive coping mechanisms.
Exactly. So we see, for example, here we see this whistleblow for anorexia, which I don't think is going a whole long way to stick it to the man. Again,
the man, Coca-Cola, one of the biggest marketing companies ever.
And again, we also must be very careful not to shame those who have things like bulimia or the like, because again, because I don't even think nobody ever does it to impress anybody.
No.
It's this awful thing that you just can't stop doing.
Yeah. It's like an obsessive compulsive. Like it actually, the overlap between OCD and eating disorders it's quite large.
But of course, one of the main things about eating disorders is that a lot of it is based on trying to live up to expectations that can never be truly that can and never should be chased. And that's oftentimes the catalyst for not when it's in the middle of it, but when it starts. And something that I also wanted to mention is that, we do see a lot of stuff that embraces and it kind of creates... We see, again, like sometimes the hoarding images. We have one right here, the quintessential...
Yes. Oh God. I couldn't live in a state like that.
Admittedly, it's a funny image.
That's sometimes what my brain feels like, and it's horrible.
But it's also kind of, there's a very dark aspect to it. And of course we have the one above, if you want to be my lover. Okay, no, this one's just good. I like this one.
Yeah, no, that's me. Literally me.
It's the one above, and
oh yeah, the one for our playlist, the playlist picture.
Yeah. And again, like something like this is a quintessential femcel image. We have like
it's a little bow. I'm just a girl.
We didn't mention this earlier, but like a lot of femcel images really does like a lot of hyperfemininity.
Yeah, like the really coquette vibes.
The coquette and the ribbons and like
But it's like coquette, but like with a really dark twist.
Yeah.
Like on the most feral images with like, a little bow, like the juxtaposition, you know what I mean?
And I think that, but a big aspect that is also a part of it, as we were mentioning the Diet Coke as well, and of course cigarettes are another whistleblow for eating disorders. But also I think that a lot of the coping mechanisms that are kind of presented and communicated and shared, it is one thing to create a support group, it's another to romanticize the maladaptive behaviors. Yeah. And I think that's where it starts to err into the side of not being productive. It errs into self-defeatism. Did you want to mention, because we had a comparison. Yeah, which just briefly with feminism, I feel like feminism, you were saying, it has an end goal. Like they're working towards something. Well, we were comparing this to the 4B movement. Yeah. Because I was like, how is that different to the 4B movement? Who, in case you guys didn't know, I think it's South Korea. A lot of women there have been experiencing some questionable behavior from men. So they have started like a peaceful protest where they are refusing to have sex with like heteronormative sex. Yeah. Heterosexual relations. And I think now it's gotten to the point where like there is not like there is not much of a young generation. It's starting to have an effect on the population. I would argue that South Korea's population decline is not necessarily due to the 4B movement itself. That movement was quite recent, but more so due to a lot of economic factors. And I think the economic factors play into the 4B movement as well. But I think like one of the... Because on the surface, something like the 4B movement can seem very similar to Femcel. And again, you could think that the 4B movement is this great and empowering and awesome movement that sticks it to the man, or you can think it's this self-destructive, obnoxious, ineffective movement that doesn't make any change. See, I'm all for peaceful protesting. I think the 4B movement is... I personally am a fan of it. But what you can't argue is that it is an active movement with an angle. It has a point. It does have a point. And to try and stop men from being so shitty. And you could... You're like, oh. You can argue whether... The argument can be whether it is a successful or not. The argument can't be whether it is active. Oh, right. And with Femcel, with a lot of the Femcel movement, we see a lot of... While we see a lot of heterofatalism and a lot of critique of men and a lot of critique of male spaces and male patriarchy, we don't see any action that resists it. And even
Well, the action, it's really an inaction because they are not participating in patriarchal values, which is heteronormative relations, or heterosexual relations.
But a lot of that is also coinciding with a very deep depression. It's not I don't believe that a lot of this voluntary celibacy can be very empowering, I think, but associated with these images of cigarettes and Diet Coke, associated with these images of rot and mess and never leaving the house, I don't think that this is an example of something that is a proactive force against against the manosphere or the male sphere. Because if you were to show this to someone, say, who's very hyper-conservative, very reactionary, red-pilled, they would probably laugh it off and mock this. And that's not to say, that's not to say that it automatically makes it invalid, but I think that what really does it do? This is my point. I am not saying that you should leave behind a lot of these principles or go out and be voluntarily uncelibate. I'm not saying that you should I'm not even saying that you should not be a misandrist or anything like that. But what I am saying is that if your values and your principles are of a certain direction, particularly one that values the independence and autonomy of women and of sisterhood, then sitting alone in a room is probably not going to do as much as you'd like to think it is.
Yeah.
And you can rationalize that it may, rob the man of the future.
It's
that's
very
going to hurt
covert
you.
instead of overt.
Like you could argue that it's going to prevent the man in the future from using you to hurt another woman, but that man is going to go after somebody else.
I was going to say, why did my brain instantly go to, instead of not participating, go hurt a man? Don't do that. That's just where my brain, that was an intrusive thought.
The cancelled Haley encouraging male abuse. How could you?
That'll teach him.
But I think I won't tell you what the right solution is. I don't know what the right solution is.
I don't think there is a right solution. It's just another.
But I don't
point of how the world can be a really shitty place.
But I do say probably it is worth rethinking. Does this make me feel good? Aside from being heard, is my situation changing for the better?
Yeah.
And I think that is, the first question for, a lot of people, especially those who are very much in the femcel sphere.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a really great place to leave it, with a question. It'd be interesting to hear what other people think, and even people in the movement. If there are any femcels listening, please, we'd love to hear more about it. Because I don't know if I would consider myself a femcel, but how do we go from this movement to actually make it better, the community?
And again, maybe it will be something similar to how kind of that Tumblr period of mental illness romanticization slowly faded out, maybe replaced by this, because mental illness is something that is easy to fantasize until you just lose all of your friends.
It's easy to romanticize until you have it yourself.
Well, I think until when you're in your first, I can't really say, I'm not an expert. You're better at psychology than I am, but I would say that for a time it can be beautiful, but over long the romanticization.
I think it's really important to see mental illness as something that is a part of you, and it can be beautiful. It's just the brain working in different ways, but it can also be really, really
detrimental.
Yeah.
And things can be better.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that things
you can work with a mental condition.
Yeah.
To be productive.
So I think and I think that's a good place to leave it off. That kind of, And I think we should make it clear that the purpose of this is not so much to kind of go in, seek out, and expose the femcel community.
I think it was just us looking at it and being like, what is it? Like, what is going on here?
What does this tell us about ourselves?
Yeah.
And I think, and I hope that if there are any femcels that ever will listen to this, feel free to comment and say.
Correct us.
And yeah, if you think that there are some things that we've probably
gotten inaccurate,
or I think that it is worth, because the point of this is, again, it's not to expose or criticize.
It's just like an open discussion, I guess.
And to empathize.
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah. And I guess today's episode really did show that it's hard out here.
We're leaving on that.
And on that note, we thank you all for listening. We'd love it if you chucked us a like, chucked us a 5-star review, a little subscribe, and we'll see you on next episode of It's Hard Out Here.